Okay, so today we're carrying on with Proclus. And so we got to, is it here again? Yeah, we got to the end of seven. So, and we started eight. Um, yeah, we did all of eight, so we can start nine.
Yeah, let me open my file.
Remembering that, so he first went through the natural virtues. So he was talking about all the like him having nice, good, rich parents, noble parents, and all these things that he just seemed to have from having a good constitution, of being healthy and good looking, having a nice memory, and so on, being able to learn
Mhm.
things easily. And then we saw him learning lots of rhetoric, which seems clearly connected to political virtue, right? Being a good citizen, being able to argue in courts. So, and so that's where we are now. He's learning rhetoric in Alexandria.
Okay. We're in nine.
Nine.
I should start nine, right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
While Proclus was still attending his school, Leonis, the sophist, someone, arranged for him to accompany him during his residence in Byzantium, which he undertook as a favor to his friend Theodorus, then prefect of Byzantium, an urbane and noble man who was also a lover of philosophy. Young as he was, Proclus eagerly followed his teacher in order not to be prevented from studying with him. But to speak more truly, it was some fortunate chance that led him back to his original place of birth. For it was when he went there on that occasion, that the goddess exhorted him to pursue philosophy and to visit schools in Athens. Okay. Um,
So Leonis is the teacher that was mentioned earlier, where he was called, Leonis the Sophist and an Isarian. So that's at the beginning of paragraph eight. And there he mentioned, not only that it was his teacher, but that he came to adopt Proclus, right? And and here we see like the connection between him continues because when he travels, from Alexandria to Constantinople on business to meet the prefect there, then he brings Proclus along. Um, Also, again, this guy is uh, we see that he's stitching together, as it were, Proclus's political network, because before he had introduced him to the rulers in Egypt, and now he's introducing him to this politician um in Byzantium, right?
mhm.
Um, and this dream he mentioned earlier, right? He mentioned earlier as an example of how dear he was um to the gods, and why this goddess, so Athena, as I argued, it was his nurse and midwife, right? So previously he said, but his nurse and midwife, as it were, was the tutelary goddess of Byzantium, who first became the cause of his existence at this time, since he was born in her city. And then she said, for she appearing to him in a dream, exhorted him to philosophy, and it's this dream that he's telling now.
So that's
Uh,
later, right?
yeah. Um, and You'll see that there's something interesting about this dream, that the dream um, is tells him to pursue philosophy and also go to Athens. But he takes a while to go to Athens. He first goes back to Alexandria and studies philosophy there for a while, and then goes to Athens later. That is a curious fact. That for Christian Wildberg reads this as indicating that the dream is somehow self-serving. That when he decides to give up being a lawyer, he appeals to the dream. And later, when he decides that he wants to go to Athens, he said, "Oh, the dream also told me to go to Athens." Um, and I don't know. I think that's like it's very slim what he's building on here because there's nothing here that doesn't say that, for instance, in in the dream there was it didn't tell him, to do one thing first and the other thing after. One moment, there's someone at the door. Oh. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Um, but anyway, we were talking about the dream, right? So there's this dream from Athena. She comes to him and tells him to pursue philosophy and to visit the school in Athens. Um, yeah. Also this fortune that leads him there. We can think here of the um move to. Oh, we can think of here the Proclus theory that everyone not only has a diamond, they also have a fortune, right? So if you choose a life, there's like a certain kind of person you're supposed to become, and the diamond takes care of that. And later but there's also a fortune that's assigned to you, which is what the world, which makes sure that the accidents that have to happen in the world happen, so that you live that life, right? So this could be pointing to that doctrine. So far, so clear?
Okay, yeah. And the point of it going there is because this goddess is somehow the goddess of Byzantium. So like he needs to find her there or something.
Yeah, and it's also uh, it's it's interesting because he's returning to his origin, right? He's returning to his birthplace, and so I think there's a motif here of reversion to your causes, right? So returning to his birthplace, he gets in touch with the goddess that is the cause of his existence. Right.
Okay. Um, where are we? And that for was then okay. But before this, returned to Alexandria and said farewell to the rhetoric and the other arts of which he had lately been so found. Then he sought out the seminars of the philosophers there. At first, he studied the doctrines of Aristotle with Olympiodorus, the widely renowned philosopher, someone famous, um, unknown, it says here, widely
Yeah,
renowned. And as for the mathematics, he entrusted himself to Hero, a pious man. Uh, Pious means like pagan, who was extremely proficient in the techniques of education.
right. Yeah. Um, this so he studies Aristotle and mathematics. These two things are not disconnected from each other. For Proclus, they're both connected with purification. So Aristotle is often referred to as daimonios, right? And in the commentaries on Plato's text, so said, well, but the daimonic, the spiritual, Aristotle says this and that. And daimonos, as we saw, they do have a connection with purification because they're mediating between mortals and gods. And Aristotle has often this function of criticizing the vulgar interpretations of Plato, the materialist or the overly literal interpretations. And then, of course, Proclus comes in with his own interpretation and says, no, no, Aristotle has misunderstood it. And actually, the answers to Aristotle's objections are already here. You just have to have the deeper reading of the text. But anyway, Aristotle has this purificatory function in Platonist education. Um, and mathematics is the same thing, right? Mathematics is supposed to be the knowledge, the first knowledge that we find within ourselves, within the soul, and that separates us then from sense perception. So, and in the treatise on providence, he connects that explicitly um, purificatory virtue. And so, if learning rhetoric was connected with political virtue. Now we're moving into purificatory virtue. And part of that is also this breaking off, right? So he said farewell to rhetoric and the other arts of which he had lately been so fond. So he underlines here, the attachment that he had to these things and that he broke off from them. So, and of course, this is a theme of the purificatory virtues, that you break off from things that you're attached to that might even be good, but now you're understanding that your true essence is to be a soul. um and and so that's like, I think, what's going on behind this.
Does this farewell consist of something like, or it just means like he left it?
Yeah, I think I think it just means that he stopped studying these things.
Mm.
I mean, it means also that he's giving up the career of a lawyer, which was what he was going to do until now, right? And so he was going to follow in his father's footsteps. So there's actually that too, right? There's this move from he was following in his natural parents' footsteps, and now he's following through his divine parents' footsteps, right? So he's, as it were, changing who he follows.
There's one question that I have about this is like, um, because someone would say, and people say this even about Plato when he talks about like against rhetoric, like this is a good piece of rhetoric, and Proclus definitely knows how to do rhetoric well in his philosophical works. Like they're not, or at least he would probably wouldn't think that they're trying. Like maybe some people try to write badly or like write very dense and boring, so nobody that doesn't already committed will read it or something. But I would assume that if he was a good teacher and writer, that he does practice rhetoric in his philosophical teaching.
Right.
So this like
Well, uh, so
no,
so
like
this
leaving rhetoric is only like we discussed maybe earlier, like only leaving it as an end. It's not like it is a useful art or
yes, totally. It is a useful art. We see him comment on style, on Plato's style, in the commentaries on on the dialogues, and there, it's clear that he knows the terms of art about how to talk about texts and so on. And of course there are parts of his text that are very rhetorical. I think so. Like the openings of the commentaries are always this prayer. So and he wrote hymns. So yeah, he certainly knows what he certainly keeps this. This goes together with that idea that you don't lose the you don't lose the lower virtues as you advance. Right. So also you don't lose the skills that you learned previously, and you don't stop using them entirely, but you just put them to better ends. Yeah.
oh right. Um and the thing with math is because it's like Aristotle said, like math is the abstraction of some very abstract part of material thing or something like that.
Well, I mean, it's true that like part of it is that it's abstract, that is like it deals with incorporeals, but the Neoplatonists don't hold to a theory of abstraction. But the point is that it's knowledge that clearly comes from within the soul, right? So
Hmm.
it's the soul turning towards itself. That's key here. And
Okay.
so if when the soul turns towards itself, it understands that it has, a separate existence from the body, and so that's why it's a purificatory activity.
Right, but then why is it different from like philosophy itself? Like, how is it a preparation for that? Because it's not about, I mean, if it is about like eternal things in some way.
Well, it still uses images because it's still, using diagrams and things like that, and it's still, it's just a preparation for, dialectic, like the highest philosophy. But in some sense, it is, part. You could say, it's part of the general investigation into eternal things. So, there were mathematicians who, at the beginning of their works, defend mathematics as the true first science, right? And what Proclus doesn't think this. Proclus thinks that, mathematics depends on principles of logic and principles, and metaphysical principles that it can't prove itself, and therefore it's subordinate to philosophy and to dialectic in particular. But he certainly thinks that, they're part of, as it were, the same structure.
Mhm. Okay.
And I mean, and you think, you can even see that, he has this understanding of mathematical method because he wrote the elements. He wrote the elements of physics and the elements of theology, and he thinks, yeah, you can still do a lot. He doesn't think that the final form of philosophy will take a mathematical form, but you can still do a lot of philosophy that way. And this is also part of his interpretation of the Timaeus. He thinks that at the beginning of Timaeus's discourse, he gives five definitions or axioms, and then all the arguments are, as it were, arguments from those definitions and axioms, as it were. Like there's a hidden mathematical treatise inside the Timaeus, right? At least in the first part.
So there's something in math where it's more teachable or like simpler, more simply teachable than like dialectics. Like obviously more people study math than philosophy in some sense.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It's more. It's certainly there's an idea that it's more teachable. It's because it's also closer to the perceptual world, and that's why have all these applications in engineering and in optics and things like that. And the whereas it's there's although mathematics can lead us to noesis, right? To like a sudden insight into the forms, that's in some sense extra to mathematics itself, right? Whereas, so like after you've gone through, like a full discussion of all the properties of the triangle, maybe, that will lead you to insight, intellectual insight into the triangle, into what a triangle itself is. But um, and then you can understand the triangle as like a metaphysical principle that you see in other things, not strictly which have that shape. But that's something that the philosopher is interested in, but not necessarily something that the mathematician cares about.
Mm, okay. Okay. Let's continue here. These men were so struck by the character of the adolescent that Olympiodorus wished him to be engaged to a daughter of his, whom he was also rearing in a philosophical manner.
We
Whatever.
don't really know what this means. Um, yeah, I mean, it could be that he was teaching her philosophy. It could mean because there were female philosophers in the Platonic school. It was like a big thing of theirs. But it's a vague expression, so it can mean many things.
He, while Hero imbued him with the whole of his own regime of piety, made him the constant companion of his hearth.
Right. So that means again, he brings him um into his home. And also, we see here that, Hero. So, of course, when we read Proclus and especially the hymns or the commentaries, we see how he talks about the gods and how pious an individual he is. And it seems here that like Hero specifically was important for this, that he, taught him a whole, series of uh, how to be a good pagan or something like that, whatever his whole regime of piety means.
Mhm. Okay, now, um, Olympiodorus was a polished speaker, and few of his listeners were able to follow him on account of his cleverness and volubility. Proclus, however, when he left the seminar after hearing him, recited the entire proceedings in the very same words to his companions. And there was a great deal, as he had heard from one of his fellow students. Hmm. This is something like having a very good memory or something.
Something like having a very good memory, but of course, it is also a Platonic trope that you so many dialogues are retold dialogues, and we see Proclus doing the same thing here.
Hmm. Of course, we don't know if they were really retold like word for word in the dialogues.
No, we don't. It's a trope. He's just praising Proclus, for everything. Here he quotes someone, he cites a source, this Ulpian of Gaza, right? But um, yeah, I
Oh,
don't know anything
we're still
more
talking
about
about
this
another
Ulpian.
man. Another man whose philosophy is sufficiently apparent in his life. So he's like a good source because he's a philosopher.
Yeah.
That's good. Okay.
Right.
Um, okay. Now, um, and you very quickly mastered the logical treatises of Aristotle simply by reading the works themselves, difficult though they are for those who attempt them.
Right. They are very dry treatises, and yeah, they're like not usually good. Like nowadays, you would not use these texts to teach syllogisms. Um, and so this is, him polishing out or finishing out his study of Aristotle.
Mhm,
And again, the logic is all about, criticizing arguments, being able to construct a valid argument. So it marries well um, with the whole purificatory strain in Aristotle, and it goes well with being a student of mathematics at this time as well.
right.
Um, and um, yeah, so that's that. So this is the beginning of his turn to philosophy. Here was in paragraph 9. So he returns to his source, and he starts living not according to as the son of his father, but as the um, son of Athena. And so the first thing he does is to start purifying himself. He moves away from rhetoric, and he starts engaging in Aristotelian philosophy and mathematics that are connected both with purification in different ways.
Mhm,
Let's and here there's and he also somehow gets a training in piety, and again part of piety is ritual purity, right? Because and we'll see yeah, the Marinus talk about some specific rituals later.
mhm.
So that might also be in the background here. So let's continue to paragraph
Okay.
10.
Yeah, they also say in the comment that there's like a thing to say, a conventional proof of native wit to be able to read the categories by yourself. I remember that they quote Augustine, but I remember Avicenna also has something like that in his autobiography or something.
Well, yeah, Avicenna says that he read the metaphysics so much that he had it all memorized, but he did not understand anything of it until he came upon, was it the work of Al-Farabi or Al-Kindi? I think it's Al-Farabi, the aim and argument of Aristotle's metaphysics, and then suddenly everything fell into place. Um, and yeah, so there's that, it's traditional to say, you can it's yeah, it's an example of how to say that someone's very smart.
Hmm. Yeah, okay. Having undergone schooling with these men in Alexandria, 10, and having reaped as much from their seminars as they were able to offer, he thought one day, in the course of someone's lecture, that the interpretation being advanced was unworthy of the philosopher's intentions. That's a nice way of saying something. Thus, conceiving a contempt for these institutions, and remembering at the same time the divine vision and exhortation in Byzantium, he set off for Athens, escorted as it were by all the gods and good diamonds, who are custodians of the oracles of philosophy.
Okay. Um,
This is a really
the tracks.
someone get a big better interpretation, and he's on the road. Like, bye bye.
Yeah, and you wonder what there's a lot. Marinus has been giving us lots of names, and all of a sudden there's no names. What's going on here? So there's in some sense he, maybe Marinus doesn't know because maybe the story was originally told in a way to protect the reputation of whoever Proclus disagreed with. And it could, of course, be that this is just one speculation I had once, that maybe it was specifically that he thought that here that Plato was being poorly interpreted, because that would also explain why go to Athens to study at the Platonic school, in the sense of, I've learned all I can with these peripatetics, but I think now that there's more to Plato than they're letting on, that there's more to this text here than they say, and so I'm going to go there. Also, this idea that the idea being advanced was unworthy of the philosopher's intention, that's very characteristic uh, of Proclus, in the sense how he, when he's interpreting Plato, he always, goes out of his way to give, the best possible interpretation, the most absolutely charitable interpretation. And and so it could be, and so, here we see the seeds of this super charitable kind of interpretation that he wants to give.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I wonder if, this is connected with the themes that we've been seeing of adoption and finding your true home. And there's something in both of these about, connecting with origins, and this kind of hyper charitable interpretation on his part is something that he does to, as it were, connect with the tradition. So, so that might be, continuation of this theme. Um, and again, we have this conceiving a contempt for these institutions and remembering at the same time the divine vision and exhortation of Byzantium. So again, he's breaking off from things. So it's a continuing, as it were, a purificatory part of his life. So he broke off from the career of rhetoric at first, but then he realizes that that place where he started learning rhetoric, that whole place was not, not enough. So he has to go to Athens. Um, and and where did he see this? He got this through this divine vision and exhortation, which came to him in a dream, right? And a dream is a clear case of when the soul is showing images to itself, right? So again, gods can influence this, and daimonis can influence this to make the soul produce certain images, but it is the soul talking to itself, and so that it also belongs to this domain of the purificatory. And then it says, escorted as it were by all the gods and good diamonds who are the custodians of the oracles of philosophy. They say this is the Chaldean oracles. I have no idea. I mean, I don't think there's enough for this. What this does actually remind me of is what I mentioned last time, which is that in the On Providence, Proclus says something to the effect that theurgy can only act when there is disagreement amongst the indications. When all the gods and daimones agree, theurgy can't do anything. And so here there's, as it were, all again, this is, as it were, divine unanimity, but in the good sense. They all pointed that he had to go to Athens. And then, that agrees with this idea of the oracles of philosophy, right? So the indications that, you should do philosophy, something like that. Um, and yeah, so this is continuing the purification. Oh,
Uh,
look, and the theme of purity will continue.
oh, without dilation. Okay, yeah. So it seems like he had some kind of falling out with someone over there, and because of that person, like, they're being on the wrong side, we don't even know who they are,
Yeah.
but and therefore left. And uh, Four. Okay, so now you give like a divine cause of this also. Like we had something like we had before. Like there's a like a material cause for why he left his place of birth, his place of back to his place of birth, and like the divine cause, which is to get the dream. And there's also like there's a material cause, which is like he got, I don't know, I'm calling it this fight with whoever gave a bad interpretation. And there's a divine cause, which is for in order that the succession from Plato might be preserved without adulteration or impurity, the gods were leading him towards the city, which is the custodian of philosophy. This was so there's like the still idea that Athens is like the city of philosophy. Uh,
Right. And also he, so he is purifying himself, but he's also going to preserve the purity of the Platonic tradition, right? By becoming the head of the academy there eventually.
Now, this was proved conspicuously even by events prior to his residence, and the truly God sent omens that clearly foretold what he stood to gain from his father and the succession of the school that was going to come to him from above.
Right. They say um that this is to do with him as, I'm not sure that his father here is his biological father. Um, right. What he stood to gain from his father. I mean, this could be something like that, where he, uh, so they're translating what is stood to gain is kleros. So what he was allotted from his father. So it's, it can mean, again, a divine allotment, like when he uh, moved to Xanthus, that was a certain divine allotment. So, yeah, I'm not really sure. And it's interesting, this expression that was going to come to him above. Um, so I mean, to do that connects with his birth chart, that he has this indication that he has presence coming from above. Um, yeah, let's you can continue a little, because now he's going to talk about exactly what these omens are.
Okay, four. When he arrived at the Piraeus, and those in the city were informed of this, Nicholas, who subsequently became illustrious as a sophist, but was then a pupil of the teachers in Athens, went down to the harbor as though to an acquaintance, to welcome him and lead him into the city as his fellow citizens. For Nicholas was also a Lycian. Okay, so he went to like bring him. He led him therefore toward the city. But Proclus, feeling fatigue on the road because of the walk and being close to the Sacrarium, though
Mhm.
he had not yet learned or heard that honors were paid to Socrates anywhere, begged Nicholas to stop there for a while and sit, and at the same time also if he could obtain water from anywhere to bring it to him. But he was possessed, as said, by a great thirst. Okay. Nicholas readily complied and caused water to be brought from nowhere else but from that sacred spot, for the spring from the statue of Socrates was not far off. Um,
Wait.
so there's some statue or something dedicated to Socrates.
Right, there's a statue dedicated to Socrates, and next to it there's a spring, and it's close to this where they stop, and when he's thirsty, and it's from that spring that he drinks. So the first drink he has when he arrives in Athens, right, is from the spring dedicated to Socrates. And so that's, an indication of his, an omen of his connection to Plato's school. Um, and also, so right, the Piraeus is the port that's below Athens, and so he's going up. He's going uphill towards Athens. This is also what's the Piraeus is where the dialogue of the Republic happens. And but they're going up to Athens. So yeah, this is a, and we can talk about here about how he, so this thirst, of course, can be thought of as a thirst for knowledge, and how, and we can think of that he's getting off a boat. So the sea is often connected in Neoplatonism with the world of generation, and dry land with the world of with the intelligible world. This is in part because of the interpretation of the Odyssey, right? So there's this interpretation of the Odyssey as about the soul returning to its homeland. Now, its homeland isn't Ithaca. It's that when Tiresias foretells to Odysseus his return, he tells him that um, that he will go back to Ithaca, but then his journey will continue until a place where people no longer know what an oar is, right? So it's somewhere so inland they have no idea what a ship is, what an oar is. And that will be where he will end his journey. And so that idea of a place totally disconnected from water and from change and from generation, that's the idea of the intelligible. And so this idea of arriving by ship and then moving away from the port, that connects with the symbolism of purification here.
Okay. As he was drinking, um, so is this a thing that like a spring next to a statue is like somehow
Yeah, it's very common to have statues next to springs and to see the springs as sacred, because I mean, they simply the productivity of the spring, this place where water just comes out of, is often seen as somehow associated with like as a symbol of the divine. I mean, the emanation is a metaphor from springs, right? To emanate is actually for water to come out of a spring.
right. Okay. As he was drinking, Nicholas noted the omen, which was now perceived for the first time that he was sitting in this gradium and first drank the Attic water from this place. Proclus, for his part, rose, made a sign of obeisance, and went on to the
Right.
city. What is that?
He he knelt or prostrated himself or something, or made a sign of
Mhm.
veneration. Right.
As he was climbing to the top, he was met at the entrance by the doorman, the top of something. Was already about to insert the keys, so much so that he said to him, I shall repeat the fellow's very words. Honestly, if you had not come, I was about to close up. What omen now could have been more clear than this, which required no polis or malampus or any such person for its interpretation.
Right. So Polus and um, Melampus are, people famed for being able to interpret things, and the so it's just hyperbole. This is so clear. This omen that he was going up to the top because the academy is uphill, and then he meets the doorman of the academy, and he says, if you had not come, I was about to close up. So this indicates how Proclus was about arrived at this crucial moment when it seemed that the academy might end, right? And he was then there sent to continue and to make sure that things would continue.
Okay. Okay, now here too, in Athens, he completely disdained rhetorical studies, even though he became an object of competition among the rhetoricians.
Right. People wanted him as a student. So it seems like he had he sent word through connections to Athens that he was arriving, such that there was this Nicolaus, who was also from his homeland, that was there to receive him. And so people knew about him. And so the rhetoricians, the teachers there, really wanted to teach him, right? And so there was a competition for who would be his teacher.
And as if this was were the one thing he had come for the first, so that's what they thought. But the first person whose acquaintance he made was the philosopher Syrianus, son of Philoxenus. Another person,
Right.
and this is
Um,
this
so
saying,
this is Syrianus, who will become his, his master, and who he will always refer to in his commentaries as, Syrianus, our master, or just, our guide, and things like that, and who he seems to take almost all of his interpretations from. Um, so Syrianus, from his name, he is a Syrian, and the name of his father, Philoxenus. Philoxenus is someone who loves a foreigner. And so there's this whole connection with being foreign, and of course, Proclus himself has this attachment with being, he was born in Constantinople, but his name indicates that he's from somewhere else. That's probably a bond between him and Syrianus. Um, it's also important that Syrianus is, there's a connection here with the rhetoricians, because Syrianus also was trained in rhetoric. He has a commentary on Hermogenes, a rhetorician. So that was actually there was a translation of that has just been published into English, I believe. Um, so this is, the important meeting with Syrianus.
okay, and where am I? Another person present at the seminar was Lacharis, a man who was replete with philosophical discourse, and a colleague of the philosopher himself in these proceedings, yet had won as much adoration for himself and the sophist art, which is rhetoric, or some,
Yes.
as Homer in poetry. This man
Um,
was present where? Uh,
so this is at the seminar. So I think what he's talking about is continuing the discussion that he arrived at the academy, right? And the person said, "Oh, I was about to close up." But obviously, he let then Proclus enter, and the people who were there were Syrianus and Lachares.
okay, and they were having some discussion or teaching, and then this man was present, as I have said, and it was the hour when visibility was failing. Even as they
The
were
sun
talking,
was setting.
okay, the sun sank low, and the moon appeared for the first time in her new cycle. Okay.
Right. So the first time that the moon is visible after a new moon.
Therefore, they tried to send away the young man because he was a stranger, so they might have an opportunity to venerate the goddess by themselves. But he went on a little away, and then, seeing for himself the apparition of the moon in this quarter, I don't know, he took off in that place what he was wearing on his feet, and as they watched, worshipped the goddess.
Right. So they they send him off, and Wilbur gives an explanation of this, that they were probably worried, you're as a pagan, you don't want Christians or fellow Christians, seeing with you publicly venerate the gods and things like that. And so they send him away. They've just met this person, and they don't want to take any chances. But then he surprisingly worships, her in public and without any consideration. There's a question here about, well, yeah, you asked what is in this quarter. I guess this must be. I'm curious about this. Um, right, yeah. So in this quarter must be towards the west, right? Because it's if it's the first time that it appears after a new moon, it's still very close to the sun. And if the sun just sank below the western horizon, then the moon suddenly appears just over the west. Right. That's this quarter.
Okay. And then, okay. At this point, this Lacaris, struck by the boldness of the adolescent, addressed the philosopher Syrianus with this inspired utterance of Plato about great natures. He said, either of those will be a great good or the contrary.
We don't really know where Plato says this.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. But it's interesting that this is a principle that shows up in Proclus's commentary on the Alcibiades. So he says that Alcibiades, absurd ambition is what shows that he is great material to be a philosopher. And there's also, commentaries in the Republic about, the people who learn dialectic, but they don't become philosophers are the worst, people, because they're these sophists that confuse everyone and things like that and justify anything. And so there are these ideas in Plato about the corruption of the best is the worst. Yeah.
It's just some kind of way of saying something like the um, something with a lot of potential, I would say.
Yeah,
A lot of power who can either be great or horrible.
yeah,
Uh, and such, to mention only a few, were the signs that visited the philosophers of the gods as soon as begun to reside in Athens.
right. So these were, there was the worshiping of the worshiping of the moon and the fact that he arrived together with the first visibility of the moon. Um, the um, the what happened at the door, right? Honestly, if you had not come, I was about to close up, and the fact that a first drink that he takes there is from the spring of that's dedicated to Socrates. Um, and so these are three things indicating, how he will be tied to the Platonic school. Um, okay, and now in 12 is like a key thing because it's the beginning of his study of Plato. And we'll see that there's a bunch of little ironies here in this text. So you can read it.
These omens are like the exact kind of thing that we discussed, like make the story very good, but like if it wouldn't have worked out, it wouldn't like really a problem. Like it's
Oh,
really
you mean that, that there are these omens?
yeah, it's like a
Yeah, I mean, there are things that set up Proclus's later success and career, and that then give a basis to interpret them. Um, what do you mean it wouldn't have been a problem? Or
like it's they're not proofs. Like if he wouldn't have gone on to be what it would, like whatever, then what what the guard would have said would just meant, it was closing up today. Now that we have it's these interpretations are probably read backwards, right? Like now it's really
oh,
beautiful. Like I wasn't gonna close up if you wouldn't have come. He might have said that to many people who came late or
right,
something.
sure, but uh, we shouldn't ignore, the impact that hearing such a thing would have had on Proclus, right? In the sense that he was already coming to Athens inspired by a dream, and and like as soon as he got off, there was this thing with the water, and then the doorman says this, and then he sees the moon. I mean, it's like the moon appear for the first time in its cycle. It's like it would sure we would interpret these things differently and he would have interpreted these things differently if things didn't turn out that way, and that happens in our life. We sometimes think there are a bunch of things pointing in a certain way, and it doesn't turn that out, and then we said, oh, I guess I interpreted it wrong. But while we are under those things that leads us to behave and act in a certain way, and there are causes for us acting this or that way. So
Um,
I'm saying, like, yeah, the interpretation is only confirmed later, but even before it's confirmed, it's already influencing. So already, right. And so even then, it's still part. You would you would still tell it. I mean, if it was like a complete biography, you'd still tell it, right? These anecdotes.
okay. Where's no. Syrianus took him along with him when he went to visit the great Plutarch, son of Nestorius.
Right. This Plutarch is not the other Plutarch, the more famous Plutarch, the Middle Platonist, who was a priest and who wrote the parallel lives and also the philosophical treatises. No, this is one called Plutarch of Athens, and we have very little stuff about him and from him. So, like, and Damascus discusses his views in the commentary on the Phaedo at a certain point, but yeah, so all we know is it was part of the Platonic Academy here.
Okay. Seeing that he was a young man, barely in his 20th year, and hearing of his determination and his great desire for the philosophical life, Plutarch was extremely taken with him, so that he was ready to let him join in his philosophical studies, even though his age was an impediment, as he was now extremely old. So Plutarch's age is kind of old.
Right. And so here we have the really old Plutarch taking on the very young Proclus. Plutarch's old age is connected with um, with what the doorman said. I was about to close down. Right. So the head of the Platonic Academy is very old at this moment, and um so he's going to die soon, probably. And this contact of old with young, this reminds us of, for instance, Parmenides and Socrates in the dialogue Parmenides, right? That's the old Parmenides talk to the young Socrates. And anyway, there's more. Continue.
Okay, so we read with him, Proclus read Aristotle's On the Soul and Plato's Phaedo.
Okay, so here he does the Neoplatonist thing. Well, he does the Neoplatonist thing, but he doesn't do one. So he doesn't. This is the beginning of Proclus' Platonic education, but he doesn't go according to Iamblichus' curriculum. He jumps straight to Aristotle's On the Soul and Plato's Phaedo. However, he is doing one Iamblican thing, which is you read Aristotle first and then you read Plato, right? Aristotle is the smaller mysteries, Plato is the greater mysteries. Aristotle purifies you from, uh, uh, corporeal, crass ways of understanding things, and then Plato gives you the deep truth. Also, he's a person at the end of his life, and he's teaching Plato's dialogue on the immortality of the soul, right?
Mm,
And this, as it were, is a capstone for Proclus's, for this purificatory period of Proclus's life, where he reads Plato's dialogue, which is about purification, and which says, that all the virtues are purifications, and that is about how our true identity is as a separate soul. So, um, that's the background to reading, the De Anima and the Phaedo here.
mhm. Right, and right, and the same thing, like the anima gets you so far, and then the Phaedo gives you the real the
Exactly. Right. And and of course the De Anima has, the very is very unclear about immortality of the soul. It really depends what you understand with 3-4, 3-5, what the agent intellect is, and things. But then, of course, the Phaedo is clearly, affirms the immortality of the soul.
right.
Um,
Um, where am I? The great man also exhorted him to write down what was said, making an instrument of his zeal, so Proclus' zeal, and saying that when these notes were completed, there would be a treatise on Phaedo in Proclus' name.
Right. This is a puzzling thing. Um, there's certainly sees that there is no such text of, I mean, no commentary on the Phaedo from Proclus has come down to us. The commentaries on the Phaedo that we do have do talk about Proclus' commentary, but it seems that it was something different than this, because it seems that it already has, his full view that includes Syrianus' teaching, which hasn't happened yet. But in Damascus' commentary on the Phaedo, he does talk about Plutarch's views at one point, and that would probably then be from this text. Also, since we're talking about immortality, this he, this idea that you will be um, continue on in your name, that's one of the forms of immortality that's discussed in the symposium, right? Being immortal because you're famous.
Okay. Right. He was also delighted in other respects by his experience of the young man's aptitude for liberal studies, constantly calling him son, back to the son thing, and making him share his hearth.
Yeah. So continues the adoption, right? So he was adopted by Leonas, then by Hero, and now by Plutarch.
And when he perceived, where am I? And when he perceived that he was stoutly committed to abstinence from live creatures, he enjoined him not to abstain from these completely, so that his body also might subserve the activities of his soul.
Right. So he was concerned that he had too strict a vegetarian diet, and that was harming his health. Um,
He also gave,
the
yeah,
continue.
he also gave the same injunctions to the philosopher Syrianus concerning the young man's diet, but the latter replied to the old man as that divine personage who, I don't know, related to me, let him learn what I wish, living abstemiously, and if you wish, let him die.
Okay.
Huh.
So that's interesting. So on the one hand, it seems that Syrianus is the one who determined that he was what he was going to study, right? He probably was like, I want you to study the Phaedo, and so I'll take you to Plutarch and he'll teach you the Phaedo. And um, furthermore, the the divine personage seems to be Proclus. So this is the one thing that Marinus tells us that Proclus told it to me. The other things, for instance, the dreams, he doesn't say that. So it seems like he might have had his information elsewhere. And remembering that, Marinus is writing this text and in a context where there are many people who, he tells us at least, that have been talking about Proclus and writing about Proclus since his death. And so the stories have been going around. And so maybe this is like his contribution, like, oh, I heard this story, right? Um, and what's curious to me is this let him die. And I think that's what I call, Proclus's death wish, in the sense that it's from Marinus' account, he works himself to death, right? So he really doesn't see himself as a human being. But rather as this, immortal soul. Um, the this so this is and the vegetarianism is connected with the Phaedo, insofar as the Phaedo also mentions transmigration, right? And so it's connected, transmigration into animals. And one of the rationales for vegetarianism was precisely transmigration, so that other animals are also animated by rational creatures, and you don't want to eat them, and you don't want to harm them. Um, and and so there's a further twist as we go on.
Okay. So, but this is like a story of saying also something like his teacher. I don't know exactly what the relation with these two people is, but like closer teacher, or I don't know, closer to his age, I guess. Syrianus is telling the old teacher, let this young man do what he wants. He seems to be on his own path or something like. He's not going to listen to you, basically.
Right. Yeah, we can ask like, well, what is the relationship here between Syrianus and Plutarch? So yeah, Syrianus is younger, and when Plutarch dies, Syrianus becomes the head of the school. So he's like the successor. And um and so maybe Syrianus at this point has already taken on many, responsibilities and at the school. And yeah, I think the thing is also like Um, maybe the idea is we'll see if he still wants to be this strict with himself once he's learned the Phaedo, right? So we teach him about immortality, and of course part of the Phaedo's message is against suicide. Right, so it starts that way. So once we get him through that, and then once we've seen the arguments for the immortality of the soul and so on, maybe that his thing is like after he's properly read the Phaedo, he won't, he'll take good care and not to die. Maybe that's
Um,
part of the thing.
so I was reading out like this like stereotype of like there's like the old teacher who always tends to be more moderate even about the things that they teach. And then there's the
Mm,
guys who are just taking everything very seriously, and this Syrianus is somewhere in the middle where he's like, seems like he wants to die. What can I do? I mean,
yeah. It can also be something like that. Yeah, Cyranus is saying like this is a young guy; he's not going to change, and also, um, it can be also that thing about that Plutarch is more concerned about this because of his old age as well, right?
mhm.
So like I remember seeing once a Catholic priest talk about the three vows of that people in religious orders take of chastity, obedience, and poverty, and that chastity is the most difficult as a young man, obedience as a mature man, and poverty is the most difficult as an old man. And so there might be some sense in which the importance of comfort and taking care of your body is more present to Plutarch because of his age.
Mm. Yeah, okay. So now this old man lived only 2 years more with his practice as his lodger, and then when he died, he entrusted the young man to his successor Syrianus, as he also did his grandson Archiades.
Right. Yeah, I'm not sure how we pronounce that. Archiades. But so here there's the irony, right? Plutarch was the one concerned with Proclus, but he's the one who dies here, and Proclus lives. And yeah, so he hands over, both Proclus and his grandson Archiades, who I guess was also living with him, to Syrianus, who becomes the head of the school.
Yeah, and when Syrianus took him, he not only gave him more help with his scholarly pursuits, so he taught him more, I don't know, but made him
Yeah,
his help
continued teaching.
then on and a share in his philosophic life, which means something, I don't know what, finding in him the sort of hero and successor he had long desired to have, and was able to receive his manifold learning and divine teachings.
Right. So this is about, the intimate connection of Syrianus and Proclus. So we'll see later, that they're even buried together, and they have, a funeral inscription saying that they hope to meet each other in heaven again. So yeah, this is making and made him his housemate from then on, and a share in his philosophical life is supposed to indicate like a very intimate friendship. Um, and then he and then he is goes and now in 13 he's going to go back to the subject of his of Proclus' education.
Okay. And less than 2 whole years, so 30. So this is the story of him meeting this Plutarch and then Syrianus.
Right.
Um,
And now 13 is his education under Syrianus.
In less than 2 whole years, he read with him the entire works of Aristotle, logical, ethical, political, physical, and the science of theology, which transcends these.
Right. Metaphysics. Yeah.
Um,
So you can say, unless he's saying, it's in a short span of time that he read everything, but also he remember that he's been studying Aristotle in Alexandria previous to this, right? And he even had already taught himself Aristotle's logic. Um, so, and also there's a clear sequence here that mimics the um, the scale of virtues, right? Logical, I mean, not so much, but there are the ethical or moral virtues to do with upbringing, the political virtues that have to do with um, right, being a good citizen. Physical here has to do with, however, physical and the science of theology, then those are all contemplative. There's nothing here that really corresponds to purificatory. I mean, what would be that would be the logical stuff. Although
you got stuck.
am I stuck? Can you see me? Hear me?
Internet connection was unstable. Not.
Okay, I can see and hear you.
Yeah, now I hear you again. I don't know, something. It said your internet is not stable. I don't know. Mine, I don't know, something. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, you were saying that the
Um,
only the logical ones maybe are the
the purificatory,
uh,
but they are at the begin, but they are at the beginning of the sequence here. Um,
is
but
how long? I don't know. Should I try to, is it, can you read all of Aristotle in 2 years? I mean, trying to
well, I think you can. I mean, although if it's all of Aristotle, that includes all the stuff like Constitution of Athens and all the biological works. And there might be, I don't know if at this point if they have the same corpus Aristotelicum as we do, or if there might have been still more texts that we've lost. Um, but I think that since he's been studying Aristotle for a while before, it makes sense.
Mhm.
Or, of course, this can also be, and also Syrianus is really teaching this with a purpose, right? He's teaching Aristotle in order to teach him Plato, right? So this paragraph is the transition, as it were, from purificatory to contemplative virtue.
Right. Okay.
So you can continue at once he.
Uh, Once he had received sufficient direction in these, as in certain preliminary and lesser mysteries, which are these or other things?
These is the works of Aristotle, right?
So then Syrianus directed him to the mystagogy of Plato in due sequence. Not as the oracle says, putting his foot across the threshold and caused him to be. Not that. I'm not sure.
Right. So in due sequence probably means following Iamblichus's curriculum. He did not jump all the way, for instance, directly to the Parmenides, right? Um, but rather he went through the whole thing of Alcibiades, Gorgias, and so on.
Mhm. Okay. And caused them to behold the truly divine rights in Plato's work with the unclouded eyes of the soul and the spotless vision of the mind.
So right. So this is truly the preliminary mysteries, or the Aristotle, has to do with purification. These higher mysteries have to do not only with purification, but with contemplation, with seeing the mystic, with seeing the thing you have to keep silent about, mystis, right? You have to be muein about it. And these are the truly divine rights in Plato's work, right?
Hmm.
And so, and he sees it with, and this mind here translates nous, right? So here nous is active, not just the dianoia. And so that is as it were, this is the initiation into the contemplative life.
Okay. And writing down, working day and night with tireless discipline and care, and writing down what was said in a comprehensive yet discriminating manner. That means something like not sure.
I guess it means comprehensive in the sense that he includes everything, but discriminating might mean that you leave out irrelevant things, or that you write it in a clear and articulated way.
Okay. Proclus made such progress in a short time that when he was still in his 28th year, he wrote a great many treatises, which were elegant and teeming with knowledge, especially the one on the Timaeus.
This is the one, this is commentary on the Timaeus that we have. It's a huge work. And for we have 5 volumes, and it doesn't cover the whole text. And but I think we have a quote from Philoponus that shows that he did comment the whole thing. So it was this commentary on the Timaeus was really big, and it would be very impressive if it was the one in the 28th. Of course, the ancient text, you can go back and, people would go back and continually work on them. So it might be, that he later expanded. This is just like a first thing on the Timaeus, but it could also, this could also be, he wrote the commentary on the Timaeus when he was 28.
Okay, Quang is, and where am I? I'm back here. In these course of these pursuits, his character also gained in beauty, acquiring the virtues along with knowledge.
Right. So just um, as it were, as an aside, that this education under Syrianus was not just intellectual, it was also moral. Um, it returns, of course, to the question of the beauty that we saw originally in, what a beautiful face he had and how healthy he was and things like that, how his appearance manifested his soul somehow. Um, and so that was and so that brings us to as it were, he comes all the way to the end uh, of contemplative virtue.
Hmm.
Um, and now he's going to talk a bit about how he exercises the virtues, and so he goes back to the political, um, and that's here in paragraph 14.
Okay, yeah, I see. And 14. And politics too, he mastered from the political treatises of Aristotle and from the Laws and Republic of Plato. So the politics, I guess, the ethics, maybe. Somewhere.
Right, yeah, and also stuff like Constitution of Athens,
Okay.
right?
Which there was supposedly more of, like,
Right. It's more of, as it were, anthropology or something, but still that would be included in the political treatises of Aristotle.
no, he was debarred from political activity because his studies had been devoted to higher matters. So that it might not seem that in these matters he confined himself to words and took no part in any affair. He urged us Archiades, that was the grandson of what's his name?
Plutarch.
The favorite of the god, to this pursuit, simultaneously teaching him and training him in political virtues and methods, and as one encourages people in a race, exhorting him to be at the very head of public affairs in his own city, and to be a private benefactor to everyone according to every species of virtue, but especially to injustice.
Right. The translators seem to think that this thing that he was debarred from political activity because he was devoted to higher studies means that he can't be a Christian, right? But that doesn't really. makes sense because Archiadus, from all the context here, seems also not to be a Christian, and Proclus encourages him to go into politics. It probably has to do with this idea that the you have to um, that you can't both do metaphysics, devote yourself to metaphysics, and also to um, spend time in courts and uh, do politics. So I guess that's just this issue that the
Hmm.
the philosopher, when he returns into the cave, is killed. Now, later we'll see that actually Marinus says that he managed to live both kinds of life, and in part because of theurgy, right? So theurgy lets you, in some sense, be a cosmic politician, if as a philosopher, even though you're not much use as as a as a local, a human politician. Um, but here's already one way in which he's trying to live both lives, which is he teaches this other person as um, as it were, like a philosophical counselor, and he encourages him to become a politician. Um, and and that's also like curious that they were, as it were, the two children, or I mean, they weren't children anymore, but the two young people that Plutarch entrusted to Syrianus's care. And so one takes up philosophy and the other takes up politics. One takes up the political life and one takes up the contemplative life. So there's something interesting that, although you can also see that as a way of like avoiding conflict. If they are both, if they were both there living with Plutarch at the end of his life and they're both taken in by the head of the Academy Syrianus, you might think, oh, these are both candidates to become the head of the Academy. And then it's convenient for one of them to become a politician.
Hmm. That's, I see. But the question is also like, but the point here, it's saying something like he still helped, so it's like he still has a part in the political life because of like his encouragement of
Yeah.
like it's, I mean, it's making him like a spectator at the races, which is not a great uh like you're not doing much. But,
Well, this is actually something that comes up in Plato's Statesman, where in the Statesman, Plato argues that if you have a philosopher and the philosopher, counsel, but he's not in power, but he counsels the person in power about what to do and how to be just, then actually the philosopher is the person who's ruling, right? So there that might be at the back of this as well, that actually forming the ruling class or advising it is also a form of ruling.
and he did in fact excite a certain aspiration in him, teaching him to be liberal and munificent with regard to his wealth by giving to friends and relatives, to residents and strangers, and to demonstrate in every way his superiority to the possession of wealth.
Right. I mean, also, giving gifts is a big part of politics. And so, this is about being, good to friends and relatives, but also, creating a political base.
Yeah, this is like the thing with like endowing fit stadiums and stuff like that.
Exactly. And also, this is late in the Christianization of the Roman Empire, and many of the uh, pagan cults are no longer state subsidized. And so they depend on, a certain priesthood and a certain regular sacrifice or a festival. It depends now on the local aristocracy paying out of pocket, right, to keep it up. And this is actually a reason why these festivals and so on happened for a long time in Athens, because the local aristocracy was very attached to them. They saw them, not more than just a thing to the gods or anything. It was part of like local Athenian pride that they had these festivals, and so that was like something that was done.
Hmm. Okay. his own gifts to the public were not negligible either, and dying after. So wait, now him also his own gifts to the public were not negligible, and dying after Archiades, he left his possessions to the cities, both his native one and Athens.
Right. The native one is probably our Xanthus, right? Not Constantinople, right? The Christianized imperial capital, right? And that he's attached to Xanthus is shown, from his name and from the fact that Marinus calls him Proclus of Lycia, and things like
The character of Archiades as the lover of truth was so apparent, both in itself and through his friendship with Proclus, whenever men of our time desire to make mention of him, no other commendation comes to the lips than the most pious Archiades. Archiades, whatever he said.
that.
Uh,
Right. And Damascus also mentions this. And the most pious here matches what was previously Archidas, the favorite of the gods, right? So if piety is, loving what the gods love, and then he's also someone who is loved by the gods, right? So again, a very pious character that, that we have here.
mhm.
And uh, it's interesting this that, as the character of Archidas as a lover of truth was so apparent both in itself and through his friendship with Proclus. That makes me think of Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, right? That I am a friend of Plato, but I am a greater friend of the truth. And um, and so there's this question about, you know, um, I mean, so being a friend of the truth can be in contrast to friendship with a specific philosopher. Here they're shown as going together, and that's kind of like a way, something that Platonists do. So Olympiodorus, in his commentary on the Alcibiades, I believe, he starts off by quoting Aristotle. He says, "All men by nature desire to know, and the sign of this is their delight in the senses, and um, and therefore, but more properly, all people desire to know the philosophy of Plato." Because it has everything. So Platonists tend to see both of these things going together, wanting to know the philosophy of Plato and wanting to know the truth. So it just underlines this idea of Plato's works as some kind of divine revelation. And the theme of friendship here also is important because that was a key virtue for the Pythagoreans, friendship, what keeps together the Pythagorean community, and also what joins us to the gods, because it's as it were, the virtue of unity. And it shows up in, for instance, the Amicus's Life of Pythagoras.
So this is okay. So now this is the political things, and that we sort of like went into like the praise of this Archiades person. Uh,
Right. So yeah, we finished the education of Proclus that took him all the way to the great mysteries uh, uh, of Plato, and we saw the rhetorical political education, and then the mathematical Aristotelian purificatory education, and the Platonic contemplative education. And now we're seeing him apply these things. So first he applies um,
mm-hmm.
the political things, and his paragraph 15 is still about politics.
Okay, a little bit. And the philosopher himself sometimes took a hand in political deliberations, being present at public debates on the cities of fears, offering shrewd advice and conferring with the magistrates about matters of justice, not only exhorting them, but in a manner forcing them by his philosophic frankness to give each his due, which is the definition of justice from the Republic.
Right. And this thing about philosophical frankness, it goes with what Marinus otherwise talks about Proclus's temper, right? So that he has these, yeah, he seems to have a large amount of anger in him. Of course, Marinus says this all well handled. It's a controlled passion and all that. But again, being very direct and very frank. is is part of that as well.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay. Again, he took an interest in the regular conduct of scholars, causing them to manage affairs with discretion, not teaching by word alone, but rather instruction them by his conduct throughout his life, and becoming, as it were, a prototype or a model out of discretion to the rest. Discretion, I don't know what it's about.
Right. So he's again, he took an interest in the regular conduct of scholars. So I guess this is has to do with again, the boundaries of being pagan in public and and not in Christianized world. And so he was apparently very uh strict with and the scholars here could be the people who are attending the academy. And so, and he's not the head of the academy yet in this, right? Syrianus hasn't died, he hasn't become the head of the academy yet, although he doesn't really tell us which period of life he's talking about. But anyway, so it seems like Proclus was kind of a scold for other people and telling them you have to behave in this way and not that way, you have to be more discreet and don't get into arguments and things like that. So that might be what's going on behind this. Let's stop here and we'll
Yeah,
continue next week. And oh, can we meet next week, the
yeah,
21st?
should be able to.
Okay, that's great.
I think most Sundays
So
are okay, besides for, I checked, I forgot. In the next month, most Sundays are fine besides for the October 12th.
okay,
I think all the other Sundays seem to be, yeah. I hope. We'll let you know about the next one. But next week should be fine.
okay, great, great. Okay.
Okay.
Well, have a good one then. Have a
All
nice
right.
week.
Bye bye.